Hello and welcome back to Lorehammer. We got an exciting episode ahead of us. I'm your host, Mark, and joining me, we got Christian.
Hello, pleasure to be here again.
Oh, man, it's not often that my heart starts fluttering before a podcast because I'm usually just talking to you and it's like, who cares, really? It's like my heart gets mad more so than excited.
I care, Mark. I care.
Yeah, okay. But today we have a very exciting guest. His name is Jervis Johnson, and heck, man, he has one heck of a resume at GW, over 35 years of experience working with them. So I'm super excited. Welcome to the show.
Hi. It's great to be here.
Yeah, let's give you a quick official intro. You're a well-known figure in the Warhammer and Games Workshop community. You worked for many years and are particularly recognized for your contributions of development to Warhammer 40k and Fantasy. You were instrumental to many early editions, which I can't wait to talk about because that's kind of where me and Christian got started. But you also worked as the designer for numerous White Dwarf magazine articles. You wrote a bunch. I recall seeing a couple of your pictures pop up when flicking through White Dwarfs and stuff. So it's very cool to talk to you, man. Like, what got you started in 40k? Maybe let's start there. Like, give us a brief rundown.
Okay. Well, I mean, as you said, I was at Workshop for nearly 40 years. Retired about 3 years ago now. And so when I joined Games Workshop, 40k didn't exist and Warhammer didn't exist. I joined before then. So my formative years were playing games like Dungeons and Dragons, miniatures war games were around, and I used to play them. But I had to make my own stuff up. So I made my own versions of games. I loved Conan when I was growing up. I loved the Conan comics, I loved the Conan books. So I made my own Conan story games and things like that. And I love playing games. Got a job at Games a shop called Game Centre originally. I got to know the people at Games Workshop. So I got to know Ian Livingstone, Steve Jackson, who were the original founders of the company. Joined them and worked in trade sales. Actually, I used to phone up toy shops around the UK and try to convince them to stock Dungeons and Dragons and Citadel miniatures and things like that. And ended up coming up with the idea for Blood Bowl, basically, and pitched it, thinking that one of the other games designers, like Richard Halliwell or Rick Priestley, would do the actual work. Brian Ansell, who ran the company then said, "No, you've got to do it, Jervis. You go off and design this game." So I did it. Literally did it, like over the weekends. I made it up myself, and off the back of that, it worked out really well. Yeah,
Victim of your own success. Yeah.
Yeah, it was, and then I moved over to the design studio at that point and got involved, first of all, off with a lot of the board games, but then just with everything, really. So I was around in the early days, but I didn't invent Warhammer or 40k. So that's saying that
I feel like no one did, though. Like, even me, I have my little fingers in the creative aspects of 40k. You know, like we all contribute in little ways, but man, you guys got to all take credit at some point. Like, you had your hands in there, man.
Well, I do take credit, but I think that it was we were chatting just before the show. I was saying that it's a collaborative effort designing these games. Yeah, there's a big team of people at the studio, and everybody contributes in different ways.
Yeah.
So we were just lucky. I think we were around at the right time, and we had a good group of people there, and we each had different things that we brought to the party. Yeah, so if I think back to those early days, I mean, you've got all the miniature designers doing these amazing miniatures, Jez and Ali Morrison. I mean, so many of them, really. And writers like Rick and Hal, and then Mike McVeigh doing the painting and stuff like that, and the artwork, John Blanche. You've just got all of these people kind of like joining in on this project. And it was, and people were ready for it somehow or another. It was, people were ready for it, and that was, the start of it back in the 80s, really. And then it kind of like went on from there. And I think Workshop always kind of like managed to combine this almost. We got kind of like an evangelical zeal about the hobby. Because we knew it was mad. Everybody said you can't make a business out of this kind of stuff. Basically, selling toy soldiers to people, you're just crazy. It's just not going to work.
How wrong they were. The amount
They
of plastic we have.
Absolutely. So I think, but so there was that zeal, but also, and what the reason that Workshop's still around now, and love it or hate it, it was combined with a savvy business sense about saying, well, also we're gonna make money out of this. Basically, those two things have to go together. They're supportive. The creativity, the zeal, the passion for the hobby on the one hand, and then the ability to kind of like make that into a successful business so it doesn't explode and vanish and kind of like go away, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, we've all given GW hard times about a price hike, but also like they've managed to stay in business this long, so good for them.
I think quite rightly too.
Yep.
I mean, like, customers have to hold a business to account.
Yeah.
It's important, and especially when you've got a company like Games Workshop that's so dominant. It's a very big fish in quite a small pot, and so it's important that people give Games Workshop a hard time. Basically, it keeps the company honest, and also it means that I think that that kind of flow of people who get introduced into the hobby by Games Workshop then get disenchanted and look around for other things or create their own things as well. It's fantastic for the hobby in its widest sense. So I think if you look around now, it's a fantastic time. There's Games Workshop doing great stuff and lots of other companies doing great stuff too. That's a good thing if you ask me.
Yeah, like, not every day do I want to go into the grim dark. Most days I do, but some days I just want to do a My Little Pony adventure, RPG. So, but that's neither here nor there. So I think one of the biggest strategies of 40K, we don't have a Blood Bowl version of 40K. Why don't we? Honestly, man, why don't we have Eldar fighting Dark Eldar in the arena, but with a football?
I think we did talk about it over the years. We talked about it. I think that it's complicated. It's a complicated question actually, because the relationship of Games Workshop to Blood Bowl, it was the thing. It was the game that I'm most associated. You can see it, my poster just behind me. Basically, the game that I'm most associated with, and probably the best bit of games design that I've done, is Blood Bowl. It was very successful, but a lot of the people running Games Workshop, their focus was primarily on Warhammer 40K and that side of things. And Blood Bowl didn't always fit, and they didn't always really understand it terribly much. Why it was so successful. So there was a time when, to begin with, really I'd like to say I planned this in advance, but it's really looking back at it with hindsight. Blood Bowl it satirizes sport, but particularly American football, and it also satirizes Warhammer, actually, to an extent, and the fantasy hobby. It takes those two things and makes fun of both of them, and it was in its own world. And then there was an attempt to kind of like say, no, this is actually happening in the Warhammer world, and pull it into the fold. There was this desire for the Warhammer IP to include Blood Bowl too, which just it didn't work. I said at the time I didn't think it was a good idea, but hey ho. And then so whenever a 40K version came up, really what people said was, well, what you're going to do is you're going to devalue the 40K brand because you're going to make fun of it and it will undermine it. And so you can't really have it has to be an alternative. It would have to be an alternative funny version of the 40K IP for Blood Bowl to be played, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, no, I get that.
Really a desire to do that, to undermine our kind of like our most important brand by satirizing it ourselves, I think. So it never really got very much traction, the idea of actually doing that.
It feels like something that would fit like an earlier 40K back, like when it was Rogue Trader, like a little more humorous, but
absolutely. I think you're quite right. But that was, that was very early on. That was really early on. I mean, you're looking at first edition.
Right.
That version of 40K lasted such a short period of time, really, when you think about it, like 3 years maybe before it really started to get serious. And I know that for a lot of, like people like Rick and Hal, Brian to an extent, but the early creatives, we kind of like will look at where 40K is now and we say, well, it sometimes gets a little bit po-faced, and like it's and that's, it is what it is. Basically, it's a big thing now, and yeah, go on. Sorry.
I think that's part of the charm, though. Like, why are orcs so loved in 40K? They're goofy and humorous and kind of make 40K look silly. But it still works. Like, we love it. Like, the Grim Dark, you need something to latch onto so you're not suicidal at the end of it. I think I just lament no Blood Mole in 40K is all. I think you need to go back. Your legacy is on the line.
Retirement.
Yeah.
Well,
happy doing other things.
39 years was enough for me. A bit like that,
yeah. So, you kind of mentioned third edition. That I feel like that's the start of true 40K, and not just because that's when I got into it, but first edition Rogue Trader is kind of wonky. Second edition, you get it dialed in a little bit more, and yeah, sure, we got a paragraph maybe or a sentence on the Horus Heresy, but we don't really know what that is. And then third edition, it kind of really gets solidified.
Yeah, I'd say that it happened over the course of second edition myself. Really.
Okay.
I think that with third edition, where what we'd got to at the end of second edition was, I think the background was fairly well embedded by that point, and we'd really done quite a few of the codexes and stuff. The IP was there. What we were finding in terms of gameplay was that really you needed to play quite small games. So I can remember we had this kind of discussion where we said, well, we can either develop the game to be more skirmishy. So it would have ended up a bit more like Kill Team, I think, in modern terms. Or we can make it so that it's more of a battle game. So you've got larger armies. And we decided to I'm sure you can understand why, to go for the one with larger armies.
It's all about that green, and we're not talking orcs.
Well, as I say, that's the Games Workshop strength, basically. It combines these two things together. And so for me, my main memory of third edition was the game scaling up. It's almost like the camera pulled back a bit, as it were, and gave a slightly wider view. And it was definitely a period where we consolidated a lot of stuff. There was a lot of I think first and second edition, there was a lot of stuff being made up as we went along, lots of areas in the background being filled in. And from third edition onwards, we'd got a pretty good idea of that broader picture. There were still some areas that we could drill into more, but broadly we knew what was happening. So it was about kind of like making it better, like finessing it, and polishing it, I guess, would probably be a good way of putting it too.
Yeah, it's okay. So now you have this whole wealth of codexes and supplements, or whatever you called them back in the day. How do you get that all together and presentable? And man, we're on episode almost 200 of this podcast, 3-hour conversations, and we still haven't covered half your guys' stuff. Like, how do you condense that? So yeah, it was kind of that cool condensing period where you get to see kind of. I remember, one of the first things I pick up is the third edition like rule book, and just all the artwork's on point, like everything's where it needs to be. Man, it's great. So what do you think you kind of was your main influence on that code or on that rule book then?
Third edition, I didn't have a huge amount of involvement with. I think I was doing other stuff at the time.
Okay.
So I've worked quite a lot on second edition. And I think in terms of like the background and stuff like that, the stuff that I look back at, then I'd say probably the Dark Angels was the book which has got most of my fingerprints on it. That was there was very little about them before the second edition, like the first Dark Angels Codex came out, which was so I remember it was combined with the Blood Angels. I think you got two together at one point. There was one that was anyway like that, but the Dark Angels was the one that I really kind of like invented most of the background for. So the idea of the Fallen and Cypher and filling in. We knew that there'd been a schism and that they'd fought on both sides in the Horus Heresy, but it's like, why had that happened? What was the rock? What was at the heart of it? And the background story for Lionel Johnson and like where had he come from? That was all pretty much me.
Cool.
And then when with third edition, like I say, I was working on some other projects. I wish I could remember exactly which ones it was, but anyway. Then when I came back and got involved, we were into the period of doing the codexes, so there was this rush to do codexes.
Okay.
And I think I did the Space Wolf one. I think I remember for early third edition. It was when they were quite thin compared to the codexes that came before and afterwards. It was a kind of short-lived experience trying to do them either 48 pages long or 24 pages long, I think.
24 doesn't seem anywhere near enough, man. That is short.
It was I think that there was a desire there to make them as short and basically as cheap as possible, so that people could just get hold of those quickly and build their armies up. And so the background almost all came out. I can remember us having long discussions about how we could get the feel of the army into so few pages, but we realised after a while it just wasn't working. That a codex or an army book, you need a chunk of text to really get the background across, because it's such an important part of it. Basically, it makes it feel real.
Yeah, like why are we playing Warhammer? It's for the minis for sure, but most of us are here for the lore, and like that's what keeps the longevity for sure.
No, absolutely, and we were aware of that, I think, right from the beginning. So quite a few of us, myself included, we came in from historical miniatures wargaming. So when I was young, I used to play World War II stuff, ancient battles, and things. But I also loved fantasy and science fiction. I grew up, with. For me, it'd be books like Dune, the novels, and as I said, Conan, and Lord of the Rings, of course, and all of those, you imagine them as a real place. I think if you look at the books like Dune and Lord of the Rings, and comics like 2000 AD with Judge Dredd, they create a world that you can believe in. It's got, and that's what we really were trying to achieve with the work that we did for Warhammer and 40k, was create something that felt real, and that so when you were collecting your army, it felt like a real thing, not something like just, they weren't just toys. And so we put lots of work into kind of developing up the background and the iconography and the way that these things looked and how they were organized, because we knew how exciting that was from our experience with historical armies, and we wanted that element within the game. And so the little codexes really didn't give you a chance to develop that up, and what they underlined was the importance of those things. That you needed to have that kind of material in there, and it makes the stuff feel real, to the extent now where, that people will ask me questions about things like, you've got to remember, we were just making stuff up. I really do.
It's not real.
I think sometimes people think that somewhere, and like in the middle of Nottingham, underneath Games Workshop, there's this vault with the big book of truth. With everything,
and you're holding it from us. I know it.
Exactly, yeah. And we just go down there and we open the book and we'll say, okay, like Dark Angels, and read up about them and then put it into a codex. But sadly, it's not quite like that. You make stuff up as you're going along.
No. Really, you guys have a machine spirit locked in the basement doing that. That's how it can recall it all.
Yeah, absolutely.
You guys' tricks. You've mentioned Conan a couple times, and then I guess the question is there a Conan count as in 40K? You know, you draw so many inspirations for Ultramarines and Rome. Is there a 40K Conan?
No, there isn't. There isn't actually. I think that I mentioned the Dark Angels earlier. So Cipher in the Dark Angels codexes was me riffing on Clint Eastwood in High Plains Drifter in particular, but the man with no name. And so if you read about Cipher, he's great with pistols and stuff like that, and very enigmatic. And in the very early versions, whenever he could fight for almost anybody, but he tended to be a bit of a two-edged sword. He was disruptive, which I felt like. Yeah. So there were things like that I draw on. Lionel Johnson's background has got a kind of like Tarzan kind of like vibe to it. He grows up in the jungle all on his own, basically. And there was I've definitely got a Batman one in there, and you get Rambo, of course, Sly Marbo, thinly described.
Some are more on the nose than others, but
well, I'm dreadful for that.
I used to. Now, it allows us come from like whatever hobby and kind of all join and bond in 40K, man. Like there's a spot somewhere in the dark galaxy for us all. You just got to go find it. Absolutely. But I used to get told off occasionally for being a bit too.
That's too much.
Not taking it seriously enough.
Okay, well,
hold on. Wag his finger at me and say, Jervis, you need to rein it in a bit here, basically. So stop some of my wilder excesses before they got out there.
So you did a lot of work with the Dark Angels and Lionel Johnson. Is there any relation with the Jervis Johnson?
No. The name
coincidence.
Rick. He'd already done that, and it's a reference to the
Lionel Johnson, the poet,
the poem,
the Dark Angel.
Yeah. So he'd already kind of like put that in there. So I was stuck with Lionel Johnson, because it's like
it's just coincidence.
It is. It really was a coincidence. Nothing to do with me, basically. I just had to take that ball and run with that.
So funny. Okay, well, I still want to know can we make up a 40K Conan right now? Maybe, perhaps. Do you vision it as like an orc? Is it a Space Marine captain? Chaos Marine? What are we feeling here?
Conan, that's interesting. I don't think you could have him as a Chaos Space Marine because he's too good. Maybe a Space Wolf. I mean, the Space Wolf would be the obvious one to go for. And I think partly as well because for me, so I'm talking about the Dark Angels. I think they're really interesting. The two chapters I did quite a lot of work on were the Dark Angels and the Space Wolves, and for me, they kind of bookend the loyal chapters. For me, the Dark Angels are the closest that Space Marines come to being Chaos Space Marines. They are right on the borderline. They're like one step further, and they become Chaos Space Marines. They're just on the other side, and that's why you've got that schism. When half of them went over because they were so close to being the type. The way that they were indoctrinated and their background and the way that they thought about things made them very susceptible. So they're very close to being as close as a Space Marine can get to being a Chaos Space Marine without becoming a Chaos Space Marine. That's a Dark Angel for me. And at the very other end of the scale, you've got the Space Wolves, and for me, the Space Wolves are the most properly heroic. Kind of like of the Space Marine chapters.
You've made a lot of people very angry today. I'll have you know, just with these statements. I love it.
This is just my take on it. I mean, it's I think that they're both there doing their thing. I mean, the thing about 40k is that what it really, for me, and again, this is personal. I should say here, right? This is my personal view on things, and this is my memory of what happened. The other people who were there might remember things differently and have a completely different view about all of the different Space Marine chapters. But for me, the interesting bit about 40k is it asks the question: in a universe where true evil exists, where there is an existential threat in the form of chaos, do the ends justify the means? And the Dark Angels would say, absolutely, yes, they do. We'll do whatever we have to do to succeed. And the Space Wolves would say, no. There are some times when you've got to do the right thing, and they'll kick back against it. That's why they get into trouble. So it's the idea of the kind of like Viking berserker is like Vikings were very good at fighting, but then they were headstrong, and they'd end up in fights which weren't necessarily in their best interest. And for me, the Space Wolves are a bit like that. They'll do things in a headstrong kind of way. Once they're there, they're incredibly good at what they do. But and so I can remember writing some of the background for Armageddon, Battle for Armageddon, and the first battle for Armageddon.
The littlest known one, I feel like, but probably the coolest one. Like, absolutely. We're talking demon Primarchs.
Yeah. No, absolutely, and the Space Wolves are involved in that. Yeah. And what they did was so there was this, as I remember in the background, there was this idea that because of what had happened there, the population were either going to be mind wiped or effectively, liquidated, by the powers that be within the Imperium, and the Space Wolves tried to stop that happening. And I think so, and I think that's interesting. It shows you that you get that spectrum of approaches and stuff like that, and then everything in between. Really, that's what's so great about the Space Marines. They take little aspects like that in humanity you can see, and then each chapter writes one aspect of that very, very large.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah, like you get a little piece of the Space Wolves and how they kind of defend the guardsmen in that issue, but you also see how Astartes chapters relate with the Inquisition. Like, which one actually is more powerful? Well, it depends. Are you a first founding legion? You might have a chance. Are you a 32nd founding chapter? What happens in that situation? But yeah, all these little details where we can start putting together how does things operate? What is this hierarchy of power? Who actually can command who to do what?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the an interesting thing to talk about is that over time the background for 40k obviously it's evolved, and so when Rick first wrote it, he saw the galaxy as being this big, really big place where communication was very, very slow. So it's much more like a kind of like a medieval world. It took months, years even for a message to get from one place to another, sometimes even decades, because the distances are so unimaginably large. So when he was writing the Space Marine chapters, they had to have autonomy. They had to be able. They had to act on their own because there was no. They couldn't sort of like get on the radio and say, like, what should we do?
Hold on, Xenos. We got to hear from command before we attack back.
Yeah, exactly. And so they. And then over time, that's compressed a bit. I think the background now, communication feels rather quicker, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I know that within the background, that's not really the case, but I think that it's become more like a 20th century kind of like place, if that makes sense. There's the communication is a bit quicker. And so that's slightly changed the relationship between all of those things, if you see what I mean, and the way that you look at Space Marine chapters changes somewhat.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a bad thing that it's changed, but I think it's interesting, and I think it's one of those things that as an author you'll have your idea, but then when you're working with a big IP like 40K, you keep on handing the baton on. There are other people who come later and develop ideas that you come and maybe go in a slightly different direction. And you get the same thing with almost all of the IP. So Batman nowadays is not the same as Batman was in 1940.
Batman used to be a killer, a straight up G.
Right, yeah. I mean, he started with a pistol, like on his hip, basically. And then, of course, in the 60s, he went, like sort of Adam West and crazy. So, these things change and evolve over time. And as a crew, as one of the people who's been creating those things, you have to you accept that. You say, okay, this is, I was there for a period of time. I had my own point of view about it, which informed the things that I was doing. And then later on, other people took that and they built on the things that we'd done, and they also moved things in a slightly different direction.
You don't have to answer this, but is there a specific example you're thinking of that you're like, I can't believe they changed that on me?
I can. I think the one that I found that maybe could have gone, I wouldn't have done it that way myself, was the Fallen, going back to the Dark Angels, because I loved the Fallen. I really liked them, and for me, what happened during the Horus Heresy was that, so as I wrote it, you've got the Dark Angels chapter and it splits into, so you've got the Chaos side, who've gone over to Horus. They're fighting against their brothers, and you've got the Loyalists. You've got the Dark Angels themselves. And at the end of all of that, the Dark Angels that went over to Horus get banished. They get hurled out through time and space, I think is what I said, and scattered through it. They become kind of like masterless, almost like Ronin is the kind of thing that I was thinking about. But I think that the other thing for me was that they'd learned a lesson. They'd gone over to Horus. They'd realised that what they'd done was wrong, and so I always imagined that the Fallen were trying to atone for the sins of the past. And the Dark Angels.
That's why Cypher's heading to Terra, potentially,
He's up to something.
Man, it's all
swords and stuff like that.
I love it.
The original one, he's taking this spiral path, is what I imagine, through the galaxy, which at the end of that spiral is the Emperor's throne. So he's on his way to do something or other. And I say the Fallen, for me, they were trying to atone for what they'd done. So they'd stand up for people. If they ended up in a place, they'd try and do the right thing. And the Dark Angels, who are meant to be loyalists, the ones that didn't go over to Chaos feel shame. They're ashamed of what happened, and they'll do anything they can to cover up the shame of the past. So they're hunting these Fallen who are trying to atone for the things that had gone on, the people who'd learned and had moved on and had grown because they'd made a mistake and they were learning from it. The Dark Angels can't learn, if that makes sense. All they can do is try and suppress it. And I really liked that idea. I think it's quite an interesting idea, really. And,
that is quite a bit different than how they paint it nowadays. Like, now they're the most loyal legion of them all, I've read.
Yes. Well, I think that with the Dark Angels, definitely, and the Fallen have become rather basically kind of Chaos Space Marines over the years, Cypher the same. And that's really, but on the other hand, what I was trying to do with it was probably a bit too clever for its own good, if that makes sense. It wasn't an easy thing to explain. It's not an easy thing to explain now. But I really liked that kind of, like the goodies are baddies and the baddies are goodies. That's really what I was doing.
I think it's really clever. I love even the way you explained it here actually makes a lot of sense. I actually really always struggled with kind of why the Dark Angels, you had full legions that fell to chaos, and why the Dark Angels were so hyper fixated on this. But the way you're describing it makes a lot more sense now.
Yeah. Well, so they've got all their I mean, the Dark Angels are all about secrets. That's the chapter itself. I mean, it's got lots of hidden secrets and stuff that's going on inside the rock. And things, what's happening there? They're I say they're kind of like almost like a metaphor for like kind of like the secret services and like spies and that kind of like stuff. That again, but they believe that the ends justify the means, and they take that to the extreme because they're Space Marines.
Yeah, it's not often talked about, like, okay, how do they get the information? Are they interrogating people? Are they just monitoring vast swaths of population? Like, it can't all just be a donation box at the front of the door. If you see Fallen, insert here. Like, no, they're going out, and I bet they're doing bad things to get this information to hide their secrets.
No, absolutely.
Man, that is so cool. We just did a Lionel Johnson episode, I don't know, maybe 2 months ago, and just hearing, I gotta go back and delete that now. I was so wrong the whole time.
No, but as I'd say, I think that, I mean, that's kind of what I mean. Is that things move on and things change.
Yeah.
And there was definitely a state. I mean, the early Space Marines and the early background for 40k, it's very dark, and rather cynical view of humanity, basically. And as time's gone along, I think it's been smoothed out a little bit. So the Space Marines basically are heroes now.
Yeah, and you can even see this in their artwork presentation too, where like John Blanche's style, we can all picture exactly what that looks like, that chaotic, sketchy, awesome vibe. Where nowadays everything's rounded off and smoothed and very bright and clear and crisp, and just more that tone shifted for sure. But all things change, like you said. You don't want to focus too much on the complaints, but I do got one more I want to try to lure you into. What about Wraithbone? How do we feel about the Wraithbone change, where it's not just a common material nowadays? It's not psychic warp crystal.
I can't say I mind terribly much either way. I mean, it's I don't get angry about the changes that are made. Definitely, it's because I think for me, partly because I know it's all made up. It's not changing something that was real.
Look, I'm like an old man. I'm retired. I don't give a heck. Like, jeez Louise.
No, really, truly, I'm not precious about the and I guess the other thing that's important to understand, like for somebody like me, is that, like I said, I was already working at Games Workshop when 40k came out. My relationship to it has always been as something that I've worked on. Whereas most of the people that I talk to, their relationship to it is that it's this amazing thing that they got so excited and passionate about in that formative period. When like for me it was Conan, Dune, Lord of the Rings, Charles Grant's Battle Practical Wargaming book and stuff like that. And so I understand why people get so passionate about it, because it's it's a really important part of people's lives, and it's a little bit different for me because I was an adult and it was something that I was working on. And as I say, you kind of like, what you do is you channel your creativity into that stuff, and you get passionate about it. But if you're going to keep on doing it for a long period of time, you've got to. You have to pace yourself. You've got to and every new project, the trick you've got to go through a little mental trick where you kind of like, you get passionate about that thing, you get really excited about it, but then you have to kind of like say, okay, I'm done, I'm finished, I've hit the deadline. Now I'm on to this next thing, and I'm going to get myself passionate and excited about that.
Part of like world building is just like you said, bouncing off of each other, and how many ideas get shut down in the world building phase, you know? So yeah, you can't take it too personal. I like what Joe Rogan says about ideas, where they're just things, man. We all have ideas. Like, don't attach yourself to them. They can change. Who cares? Like,
Yeah, I agree entirely with that.
Yeah.
I really do. I think you'd go mad otherwise. Basically,
Yeah.
you're just kind of like, it would be.
And the you 10 years ago is different than the you now, and like it's fine. It's all gonna be okay, everyone. Yeah.
For sure.
You've mentioned kind of historical stuff a couple times now. Did you have a pretty big hand in the Warhammer Ancient Battles game of 1998?
I certainly did. Yes, it was my idea, actually. Basically, it was a basic. So myself, Rick, in particular, and the Perry twins, Michael and Alan Perry, miniature designers. We were still playing historical games, and the Perrys they'd got this deal with Workshop where they were when they weren't at work, they were allowed to do historical miniatures in their own time, basically, and sell them. I think it was Alan Perry had come up with some like late Romans and Picts. Picts live in they used to live in Scotland. They're this tribe. Nobody knows very much about them, to be honest. But anyway, he'd done some ranges of miniatures, and he wanted to take them to a war games show to kind of show them off and kind of like get people to buy them. And I said, I bet I could take the Warhammer rules and do a couple of army lists, so we could just play Warhammer, to demo. And that was the start of Warhammer Ancient Battles. We just kind of went on from there, basically, and managed to convince Workshop, because Workshop was different back then, to allow to print this and sell it. It was literally me and the Perrys primarily. Rick was involved mainly, sort of like keeping us in line, because he was rather more on a directorial level, whereas I was kind of like a games designer, really. And we literally, in lunchtimes, went and packed boxes and sent them out through Games Workshop's mail order department and stuff like that, and did things. So yeah, that was a great project. And then since I've been retired, I've got back together with Michael and Alan, and one of my projects that I've done is a little set of rules called Valor and Fortitude, which you can download for free from the Perry Miniatures website. They're complete. They allow you to play Napoleonic battles or English Civil War battles, so I've got back into that kind of side of things.
Cool.
And then still doing little bits of freelance work here and there as well, with on fantasy and science fiction stuff that I unfortunately can't talk about, but because I'm NDA'd. But there's some little bits and pieces of stuff like that. So I still keep my hand in on the games design side. But not with Workshop stuff anymore.
If you could, and don't overthink this question, go back in time to a certain time frame in human history, when would it be?
Oh, I don't know whether I particularly. I'm sort of in the moment kind of guy and looking forward. So
Okay.
I just don't know. But what I can tell you is that if I could live anywhere in any time, and it didn't have to be real time, the place where I'd live would be in the village with Asterix and Obelix and the Gauls. If you know the Asterix books, there's a TV series. I think they've got a new movie coming out soon. It always struck me as being just the most fantastic place. So I'd live there. That's where the people are nice. Nobody really gets hurt. They get to travel all around this weird, and it makes fun of absolutely everybody. It has the most outrageous puns. And stuff. I love those books. I've got some of them on my shelf over here, actually. It was great when I was really young. In my 12, under 12. I was obsessed with the Asterix books. So that's where I'd live if I could.
Okay, that's a great answer. I'll have to check that out a little more. Christian, have you heard of that? You kind of seem like
If you've not read any of the Asterix and Obelix books, then just get hold of a copy. Honestly, they are.
And they're kids' books, like directed at children.
They're meant to be kids' books, but they're the kind of kids' book. I mean, they're comic books, French comic books. So a bit like Tintin.
Okay.
So okay, just prove that I'm. There you go. That's
okay. Yeah, no, I have seen that. I know what we're talking about now.
And what they are is they're written as kids' books, but they have a fantastic sense of humour in there. And in the French original, they've got the names for all the Romans are kind of puns. They mean things in French. And the translations into all of the different languages, the translators do the same thing. So you get these kind of like really silly names. The Bard is called Caconifex, like a cacophony.
Okay, so just a sound marine, just a noise marine.
The druid, it makes there's a magic potion that they drink, which makes them very strong. He's called Getafix, and stuff like that. It's just, I just love those books.
So you're not just always in the grim dark. You like other things, which is always nice.
You can tell by Blood Bowl, to be perfectly honest.
Do you have a preferred American football team? Like, do you watch American football?
It's my sin. For the last 40, more than 40, no, it'd be like 45 years, I have supported the New York Jets.
Oh, nice. Okay.
And one day they might get to a Super Bowl when I'm actually there to watch it. I don't know, but it's kind of like the New York Jets are my team.
Let's manifest that. New York Jets. Okay.
Oh, go Jets, go Jets.
Yeah. Well, we're getting close to the end. I do have one more big can of worms to open up here. Now, I heard rumors, and who knows how true, but it was you who redacted the 2nd and the 11th Legion. No?
No, that's not me. No,
okay.
No,
that's internet hearsay.
Yeah. I can tell you why. Yeah, I mean, but no, I can't tell you why they redacted. Because this is, interestingly, this ties in with Asterix and my love of ancient stuff. Rick loves historical stuff too. He's got a degree in archaeology, and he studied Roman history in particular. So when you look at a lot of the early background for 40k, a lot of it's tied in with Roman history. Now, in Roman history, you have legions, which are a lot like Space Marine chapters. They have numbers, and 2 of them they've got no records of. They don't know what happened to them. They were around and then they disappeared. They got redacted. And so Rick took that idea and applied it to the 40k background, and that was his. So that was his idea.
Okay, shoot, and I couldn't have ambushed him.
As far as I know, so when you're writing stuff like that, you'll just do the redacted bit. You don't necessarily decide what's going on. So the Horus Heresy was a quote that Rick made up for the original Rogue Trader book about Horus being thrown into the Eye of Terror by the Emperor by his heel, as I remember it. We needed to have Space Marines fighting Space Marines for Adeptus Titanicus when we originally did that game, and we saw that quote. So we said, "Oh, we could do this. Basically, why don't we take this and we'll make this a civil war?" And they were sort of, "Well, that's 10,000 years ago." We went, who cares about that? We'll just we'll just run with it. But so
minor detail.
Rick wrote a little tiny quote. He wrote a sentence basically, but he left that hook in the background, and later we expanded on it. And though the redacted chapters you're talking about are 2 hooks, he put those hooks in there, and we've never done anything with them. But at some point in the future, one of the future developers of 40k might go, "You know what? I think it's time to look at that hook, and let's explore that, and let's find out actually what happened to one or both of these chapters and why they've been written out of the history."
So that opens up like, okay, so is there anything that is considered like sacred canon? I wonder, like, at how far can you open stuff up or redact things, or like, because and now at this point, 30 years later, it's kind of would be like an odd thing to bring those guys back into it, in my mind. But
I think it would be. But I think that you can change stuff. You can always do stuff.
Like you said, it's all imaginary. So I guess you can do anything you want.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. And sometimes you end up in a position where you have to start thinking about changing things, because the original background was written in the 1980s by a bunch of white middle class blokes, basically. It's kind of like so, and it shows in place. I mean, we were in our mid-20s, when we were writing a lot of that stuff. And we were, we were brought up in the our formative years were the 60s and the 70s. And that gets embedded within the IP in the background. And there are times as you go along, you think, yes, maybe we wouldn't have done it quite like that nowadays.
There's been a couple that you read and you're like, yeah, that's
basically.
I get it though. Like, you put 3 guys in a room, especially at that age, and you're just shooting the shit, man. And sometimes who cares? You're just trying to maybe make each other laugh or just be ridiculous. It's all fun and games. So don't take it too serious.
Yeah, we were immature, and there were lots of things that like the world's changed. Yeah, basically. And so I think that what that means that for Games Workshop, you'd always have to think about it very hard. Whether if you were going to change something fundamental within the IP, it would be a big discussion.
Yeah, can Ferris Manus come back? Is that a possibility potentially? Like Sanguinius, how dead is dead?
You see, exactly. Anything can happen because it's all made up. I think the real difference between Games Workshop then and Games Workshop now was that basically back then we had very little oversight. We were working to tight deadlines. We had just to make stuff up. A couple of people would read it and then it would get published. Whereas now, Games Workshop's much more professional. The deadlines are much further out, and that's partly because you've got a lot of people who are like stakeholders in the process. You need to be able to see what you're doing, so you don't just kind of like go off and do something completely balmy, or at least that everybody's on board with the changes that are being made. But I think that if it was decided that a fundamental change needed to be made for whatever reason, then it could happen.
Sure.
But it would be what I tended to find later on was that we were much more likely to take risks in the early days, and Games Workshop, as it gets bigger and bigger, it becomes more and more risk averse. It's much more dangerous. Because we saw what happened with Warhammer when Age of Sigmar came out and the world got blown up. I mean, that was, it was tough times all round, basically, for a lot of people who were involved in that project, particularly the ones who made the decision to do that. So I think that what you'll find is that the Games Workshop will be quite conservative with a small c. It can make changes.
It's not like they hire an author and that guy writes his book and then he's like, well, I just don't think the Emperor is really the Emperor. Like there are people checking it along the way, which is nice.
So there's a lot of oversight now.
As much as things change, you still need to, there's still concepts and themes, and some things still have to remain the same. How much? Hard to say, but
it's not something we have any control over. That's for sure.
We always talk about the ship of Theseus, and I guess it comes to lore too. Like, how much of 40k lore can you replace before it's not even 40k lore?
It's a good point. I think. But I think that also it's a bit like revisionist history, isn't it? Yeah,
sure.
I think that that one of the things that I've learned being interested in history is that people think that history is that they're reading the truth, but they're not. They're reading a story. They're reading a story about history, about things, and so it changes over time because stories are based in the culture of the time that they're being told. If that makes sense. So as culture changes, as society changes, the stories that are told in that culture and society change too. And that's going to affect things that are, like Warhammer 40k and stuff like that. Their stories being told at a particular time. You still have the old stories, of course. That's the thing, that you've got these things exist. So you can always go back to the older stuff and look at it. And I know that there are plenty of people who do. Old Hammer is a thing. I know people who play Rogue Trader still.
Sure.
All versions of 40k, all versions of Warhammer. I was recently chatting. There seems to be there's a game called Advanced Hero Quest that I designed, which I met somebody who's playing quite regularly with a group of friends at this moment, out on the West Coast in San Francisco. So I think that those things don't go away, and you can always go and rediscover them if you want to, and you can see that evolution and change over time.
Yeah, no, for sure. Like, I definitely have my preferred editions of 40K, and I'm sure as 20 years from now, I'll have another new preferred one. Oftentimes, when I read when the Horus Heresy books came out, it's kind of, you get a whole bunch of new information, and sometimes I really liked what they did with the Primarchs, other times not so much, but what do you do?
Yeah, no, exactly.
But-
It won't stay the same. That's for sure. There'll always be new stuff coming along.
Christian, do you have any final questions for the man while we have him?
Nothing that wouldn't start another conversation for
No, that we got technically 6 minutes. We got a couple.
No, I just share your fascination with the Conan world. Are you coming more from the novels or the comic books?
I love both of them, actually, but in different ways. I've got a real soft spot for the early Barry Smith Conan comics and the black and white Savage Sword of Conans from the 1970s. But I love the books. I mean, Robert E. Howard can write. And I just find them really charming. I've got a little story. I'll give you a little Conan story. So, when my youngest daughter is 22, now, but when she was very little, about sort of like 5 or 6, we were having a lot of work done on the house. We had to move out, and we ended up kind of like going from like round the in-laws, kind of like staying in different houses, and we ran out of books for her to read. And what I got was My Savage Sword of Conan. So I ended up reading her these quite, and really made my throat. So I had put my voice really deep, and she still loves Conan. I've talked to her about it every now and then. She loves Conan. She loves those stories. So I like all the Conan stuff, and I've managed to get my daughter Bella to love Conan stuff too. What I don't really like are the Arnold Schwarzenegger movies. I know lots of people love them, but for me, it's not Conan.
And I always have that problem too when I bring up Conan, because again, I'm a huge fan, and everyone automatically goes to the movies, and I'm like, that's not what I'm talking about.
Absolutely. It's just he's too lumbering.
What about Jason Momoa? How do you feel he did with his movie?
I thought that was better, definitely better. But I find the same thing with Batman, because I love my comics, and Batman is just about my favourite comic book character. And I don't think they've ever quite managed to get him right, really. In the comic, they have moments in some of the films where you think that's Batman, as I imagine him to be. But I think it's the stuff you read in your formative years. It stays with you, those first ones, and that becomes the perfect one. And it's very difficult to match perfection. Like when
you can really live up to what you're picturing. Yeah.
I think the closest was the Lord of the Rings films. I thought that particularly the first Lord of the Rings film, I thought it really captured a lot for me of reading the book. And then slowly went downhill from there. The Hobbit didn't really work for me and stuff like that. And the second and third movies were cool, I thought, but I particularly liked the first of the Lord of the Rings films. But it's hard, I think, when you love a book or a comic or something like that, and people do their version of it,
never lives up.
That's not the real thing.
True fans know. Yeah. Well, Jervis, thank you so much for making time to talk to us. It was really fun, informative. Once again, now I know so many things to either repent for or to throw in other people's face saying, I was right about that one. One of the two.
Well, I'm glad to have been able to help.
Well, everyone, thanks for listening, and we'll see you all in the next episode.